walking, which is definitely not mine. I think I'd definitely be getting on a train without a doubt. Beach is more popular than mountains. Invisibility is a much more popular superpower than mind reading, interestingly enough. And people would rather be the star player in the losing team rather than the bench player in the winning team. Most people have not volunteered before internationally, but people do feel like they've made a sustainable impact, or at least half. And 92% of people, or 90% of people, do intend to volunteer internationally in the future. So I guess we've got, a bit of a mixture here of people who haven't done it before, but people that are definitely interested in doing it in the future as well. Well, I think we can probably make a start, and if anyone else joins us, they can kind of catch up. But first of all, welcome to this National Student Volunteering Week event. My name is Dave, and I'm the Volunteer Centre Manager at the London School of Economics. And I'm also a committee member of the Student Volunteer Network. And we're the group of people that organise Student Volunteering Week each year. And so if you haven't been part of it before, Student Volunteer Week is a UK-wide celebration of student volunteering. And it's an opportunity for students to get involved in volunteering, and a chance to celebrate all the volunteering that students don't as well. So before we start, it'd be great if you just want to put in which university you're representing today in the chat, as we really like to get a really good idea of all the different students that are coming to us from all over the UK. So please just feel free to write in your university in the chat. We'd love to see that. Feel free to hashtag and sort of go on SVW21 or hashtag Student Volunteering Week and talk about the work that we're doing as well. So finally, we're here this evening to sort of talk about the ethics of voluntourism and international volunteering. And I'm delighted that we have Chloe Sanguinetti joining us today, because we're going to be showing her film, and then she's going to be sort of helping us lead a discussion about the ethics of international volunteering afterwards. The film, I am going to be streaming it by screen sharing, but just in case it doesn't work, I am going to share the link in the chat box as well, so that if it isn't working, you can watch it on your own YouTube and then come back to the group afterwards too. Just to say, we'd really welcome lots of student comments throughout this as well. So feel free to start writing in questions in the chat box as we're watching the film, or you can wait until we sort of get to the end of the film, and then we'd really love your contributions for this as well. Just so everybody knows, this is going out live on YouTube, so feel free to keep your camera off. We completely understand if that's what you prefer to do. But it's also really nice for Chloe and the rest of the panel to see lots of faces as well. So if you would like to turn your camera on, really welcome it. So apart from that, I'm going to put the link in the chat box, but I'm also going to hand over to Chloe to introduce the film, and then we'll start watching it.
So hi everyone, my name is Chloe. I'm originally from Paris. I'm based in Paris. I have a background in humanitarian aid and political science, and currently I'm a video producer for a communications agency. But a few years ago, after I finished my studies, I went on a round the world trip, during which I produced the documentary that you're going to see tonight. I had volunteered myself when I was 20, I think, in Vietnam for a week, and I was giving English classes to street children. That was how the company was advertising it, and kind of realized while I was doing it that something was kind of wrong. I wasn't a teacher, I was French, so my English wasn't that great either, and I wasn't making a big impact. So later on, when I did finish my studies, I started taking an interest in what international volunteering was really and what impact it was having. And that became the film that you're going to see. So the film is a kind of a compilation of interviews that I've done with volunteers that were volunteering on the field in a few different countries. Some of them volunteering in different activities, so either with children or doing construction work, and asking them about what they thought the impact that they were having, if they thought they were even having an impact. and if they were going to volunteer later. And I also interviewed experts, director of local organizations that were hosting volunteers as well. But I'll let you watch the film and then maybe we can have a chat about it afterwards.
Fantastic, thanks Chloe. Right, I'll share my screen now. I'm just going to put the link into the chat box as well, just in case anyone's having any issues in viewing the film through here. But yeah, I look forward to showing it now. Thank you, Chloe.
Over the past few years, a new form of tourism has become increasingly popular and evolved into a true international trend. It seems being a regular tourist, traveling and discovering the world is not enough anymore. More and more young people now decide to help local communities during their trip by doing construction work, teaching English, or working in orphanages, to name only a few options. This trend is known as voluntourism. What's your name? How old are you?
Megan Agnew, and I'm 18.
Where are you from?
England.
My name's Nikki. I'm from Holland. I'm 23 today.
So my name is Jonathan Walton and I'm from Belgium and I'm 22 years old.
My name is Megan Milne. I'm from South Africa. I'm 20 years old.
My name is Max Schaefer. I am a university student at University of Wisconsin-Madison in the US. I'm 20 years old and volunteering in Vientiane.
Volunteers don't need to have a particular set of skills or to be there for a long period of time. But most of the time, they are expected to pay in order to participate in the project. Do you have a minimum stay for the volunteers, that they come and according to what they
yes,
can do?
Actually, minimum is 2 weeks, but of course, we never close our door. Some people, visitor or volunteer, they also can come a few days. They can share what they are.
It is estimated that every year, 1.6 million people participate in volunteer tourism projects around the world, spending between 800 million to 1.3 billion pounds.
So why did I want to volunteer in the first place? For the same genuine reason as everyone. It looks good on the CV, it's interesting,
Volunteer is not also helping people. I think volunteer also connected with the local people. The environment, the people here are very welcome to them. That's something unique that they can see here, and that's why they come here. The whole experience, not only helping the students, but also the local people, the local things they can get that here that they cannot get in their countries.
Always wanted to go to this part of Asia. I was unsure about Thailand. I'd love to see it, but I slightly wanted to see somewhere completely unfamiliar. Not many of my friends have been to Cambodia. Kind of felt like I wanted to do something a little bit different. Get out, to break away a bit, to get out of normality, speak to new people.
We had a
nice conversation with Sal.
Yeah, it was fun.
Where?
Why do you think they come here, the volunteers?
I think they come here because they want to help. That's the first impression I got from them. They really want to help.
I'm traveling. Why not see a different part of the world where they have it less fortunate? I always realized I was fortunate. My parents always brought me up realizing that I was fortunate, that nothing was that easy in life. Every time I say to my mom, like, 5 days of work sucks, she's like, welcome to the real world, because this is how it goes. So I was brought up that way, and I felt like I could do so much more. And I don't have to give my life to it, and I don't have to change everything, and I don't have to change the world, because I don't believe it's obviously not that easy. But I felt like I could definitely give back a little with my own time and money compared to not doing anything.
It just feels nice to kind of share something with someone else, because, I mean, being from the first world, you have to realize that it's a minority of the world population, and it's a dice roll that put you there. And so now it's kind of your job. You've been endowed with more money, you've had a better education, and so why not share it with someone else, you know, and why not try and help other people reach that standard, or at least...
So you think that's why people volunteer in general?
I have no idea.
Clear. I would say that first there must be from their compassion, their commitment. They want to contribute something that they have to the third world country, especially the people and younger generation of this country. And the second one, maybe I'm wrong, they may want to build up their skill or their experience, and then they learn somehow during their work with us, and then they learn more about, you know, the real life and the culture, and that's a part of like knowledge for them to build up for their better, like for their future employment or whatever, you know. Yeah. So this is something that I understand. Yeah.
Amy and Sarah both work for an educational NGO called PEPI in Cambodia. They actively discouraged unskilled, short-term volunteering.
So many of the volunteers who are coming to Cambodia, as one example, but all over the world, they are coming with a genuine desire and a genuine belief that they are going to make a difference. And more often than not, it's just a difference on themselves, or it's made them feel happy than actually making a difference. And there is some good in that, of course. That's a lot of happy people, but it's just the long-term impact of a conveyor belt of a different teacher every week, when it could be one amazing Cambodian teacher that could have received the support from all those international people that have skills to offer to make that one teacher incredible.
In a globalized world, where information is so easily accessible, young people are becoming more and more aware of the disparities that exist in the world. And voluntourism is seen as a good way for them to help those who are less fortunate. But without any skills and over short periods of time, how much do you truly help?
My experience was really nerve-wracking when I first got here. I mean, I've never had any teaching experience.
We have to do all this farming, and then I asked, so what's the objective of this farm? And it's, first of all, it's not very clear, and they said, okay, maybe we're going to plant some mango because we do this mango jam to support financially our activity of building schools. So we're gonna use those mango, but also they want to show local farmers how to grow fruits with less waste. But then we ask, but why can't we do it directly at the farms? Why do we have to build a whole farm? So I don't know. The farming project is a bit weird. So I'm going to try to, but as I said, they're very flexible. So if I say I don't want to work at the farm anymore, they'll say okay.
At the beginning, they sent us on a project to build a well, which was really rewarding at the end, but we were far more of a burden on this building than a help, completely. And so that's when I got really angry, because we all felt really patronised, like, oh, let them dig a well and let them feel like they're contributing to the world.
I think the important question is, if you were an unskilled teacher at home, for example, in the UK or France, would you be allowed to wade into a school and take over a class for 2 weeks? The answer is probably no, it wouldn't be acceptable to do that. And so why is there this consciousness within the travel industry that it is acceptable to do that in a developing country?
And why do you think?
I paid £2,000
For how long?
for 10 weeks for accommodation, food and transport.
But not
my flights.
Not your flights.
I paid for 4 weeks 7.5 million rand, rupiah. So that is a little over, it's around 500 euros for 4 weeks. Including accommodation and food.
7.5 million rupiahs for a month.
Yeah.
You told me the first day I was here, the average salary
is 1 million.
Is 1 million.
Yes.
Is it justified for you now?
Yes.
We gave a donation to each project that we work for of £100. Motives behind it aren't humanitarian or charitable in any way.
Why don't you think? Yeah.
Because I just don't. I think it's more of a trip and then let's throw in some volunteering. It's frustrating when you see the amount of money that you hand over. There are 13 of us in one house. And yeah, we get food and water, but it's for £2,000, £2,300, 200, whatever it was. You question it quite a lot.
In 2010, one of the major volunteer sending agencies reported to have had an annual turnover of $24 million, making over $3 million in profits. It seems selling poverty and exploiting the good intentions of volunteers is a profitable business. On top of taking advantage of the goodwill of volunteers, voluntourism trips can also be at risk of doing more harm than good, disturbing local economies, taking jobs away from local people, disturbing the growth and development of children who get emotionally attached to the volunteers. Do you think that volunteers can also have a negative impact?
I could see that being an issue. I don't know what you can do to solve that other than not volunteer, but I think they also do good work.
A lot of kind of younger volunteers come and do construction work, which you could just pay local people to do, or they do English teaching, but a lot of the time it's rather than training local teachers, which would be hard in 2 weeks anyway, it's kind of like direct classroom interaction, which when you have different volunteers coming in on 2 week cycles is kind of disruptive for the students. I'm not sure how much they might actually learn.
Okay. A. Apple. Okay. D.
I know there's also problems with bad organizations where volunteers can come and feed into a bad organization. I know there's some in Thailand that exploit children that you have to watch out for, and so an orphanage maybe that will take things away from the kids when volunteers come in the hope that people will give back. That's something you have to watch out for.
We were very aware of other things that were taking place within Cambodia, exposing children to adults who you don't know anything about and putting them in dangerous situations. And thankfully, you know, we never had that situation within our organisation, but we absolutely didn't want to be at risk of that kind of thing.
I wanted to really be in contact with children, so that's why I decided to come here. You create such a bond with the children, and I'm sure every volunteer does, but your bond feels so special and unique with them. It must be terrible for them as well, because they get attached to the volunteers and to their teachers, and then the volunteer just leaves and they get a new person.
Joe is a Cambodian tour guide for Peppy Tours, and he has met a lot of short-term volunteers during his work.
They are coming and doing with the wrong organization. They will end up, come and teaching English pretty much. They have a week or 2 weeks, might end up just doing the same like the other people who have done 20 times or 30 times already with that kind of activities and, head, knees and toes and all of that. You know what I mean? It's not a bad thing, but if you are the kids who stay or live in that orphanages or that organization, then what's the point?
It's a very rewarding task because the kids are so nice, and at the end they're always very respectful. They say hello and they thank you very much and they really like you. But then I think you should be there for, the task should be more consistent, so you get to know more the kids, and for I think 3 weeks there's been a different volunteer every week. So I think for 3 weeks we've done the same thing all over again, and it's difficult to come and to assess the English level of kids.
Yeah.
What's your name? Sarah. Nice to meet you.
Somebody.
All the white people here that are here are the volunteers, and so the village knows usually that when they see white people, they belong here. And the kids, they all know you. So when I would go to town just to the supermarket to get something, and the kids come out of school, you hear your name 20 times, and that's amazing, because they learn to appreciate you, or you see how much they value you. So they love us, I think, as volunteers. Also depending on obviously how you are with them. And that makes it nice. It makes you feel appreciated.
Volunteering is such an odd oxymoron of selflessness and also selfishness. It's hard to understand in yourself because you want to give, but at the same time you derive so much personally from that giving. So I think it's quite a tricky issue.
Why do you think you do it?
It's such a tricky question. Because I sometimes question myself as well. Not in that I don't enjoy it, but sometimes you look at yourself and you think, am I just doing this to make myself feel better about whatever upbringing you may have had.
Recently, critics have been stronger and stronger towards this type of volunteering, with people raising awareness about the dangers of poorly arranged voluntourism trips. Ruth Taylor is one of them.
Sending plain loads of 18-year-olds who are unskilled and unqualified into a host community you are potentially putting a burden on that community, not giving them support for local initiatives. And you've got to ask yourself what the assumption is, and the assumption is, unfortunately, that we're Western, we're well-educated, we're usually white. Why the hell would we be better at doing development than those communities? And why definitely would we be better as an 18-year-old who's never done this before, who's potentially never, ever volunteered in their lives?
Do you think you're making an impact by coming here?
I'd like to think so. Yeah. I mean, I can't say for certain that it's more or less than what anyone else could have done here, but I'd like to think I do.
No. Yeah, there you go. Good. All right. Follow J, Sian, Ja. 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 What's that?
Voluntourism trips are often described as being another form of colonialism or a very patronizing form of help. It is also blamed for spreading clichés and preconceived ideas about poverty.
The discrimination level here is insane compared to, especially in places like these where there's not a lot of white people. You're white, you have money. They don't know how much, but they think you have all the money in the world. But they have no idea of how much money we have. All they know is that it's more than what they have. And they just think that it's never ending as well.
I think there's a danger with this kind of trend of unskilled, young, usually volunteers coming and building something or teaching a class or doing whatever. It sends out, the message that sends out to the local community is one that we're more capable than you, or even though actually you're not, you're telling people that they should be dependent on you.
And why do you think, because that's fair enough if they want to help, and I think most people want to help.
Yeah.
But why come all this way? Why come to Cambodia and
I think to a lot of people believe that Cambodia is in extreme poverty. Again, it's based on my opinions. So when you go somewhere really extreme or poor, then it makes you feel, it not make you feel, but you wanted to be a part of it. You wanted to get that country to be better, to be like the rest of the other countries, neighborhood countries, or the rest of the world. For me, I grew up here and I live here and I study here, I work here. Sometimes I feel uncomfortable with some of the organizations or orphanages viewing Cambodia and generalize that we need this, we need that, we need this thing, we need that things to make us this way or to make us that way, to make us, really, is it how you view Cambodia?
A lot of these kind of travel companies really that are selling save the world vacations put a lot of time, energy and resource into creating media that send out a very clear message of you can have a positive impact and you can change a child's life. And a lot of it is actively encouraging people not to think critically.
We do send young, inexperienced, unskilled people to nations in the global south to do development, whereas development is arguably the most complicated sector in the world. It seems weird when you think about it, right?
And I wouldn't do it in this way again.
Really?
I feel like it's very manufactured. Like, I really, really enjoy the projects, and I love teaching. I love being around the kids and contributing in that way. But sometimes you feel almost patronised, like, oh, let's get these 10 posh kids from England, try and make them feel like they're doing something good for the world. They'll just go back home and faff around at university and then maybe get an okay job.
The fact that so many people want to help is exciting, but voluntourism might not be the way to go. There are right ways to volunteer, good programs and good organizations. However, you should research carefully before you decide to go. It is easy to become a victim of this market, where your good intentions will be exploited for money. And it is crucial to think critically before engaging yourself in this kind of programs. There are also other ways to help. Being an engaged citizen at home, reading the news, being aware of what is going on in the world, signing petitions, lobbying, voting, donating money to NGOs, or volunteering on a regular basis at home. These alternatives might not be as glamorous or glorifying as a 2-week volunteerism trip in an exotic country, but they might have more impact and be less at risk of doing more harm than good.
Well, thanks everyone for watching that. Hopefully the tech worked really well for you and you're able to watch it either with us here or on YouTube by yourself. We'd really love some comments and some questions from the students that are here as well. So if you do have a comment or a question for Chloe as well, please feel free to write that in the chat and we will come to you in a moment. But I've got a few questions for Chloe first, which I hope she wouldn't mind if I ask her, and it'd be great to hear your views on that. I mean, first of all, like, why has this become such a big topic in recent years? And why did you feel like this was a really good film that you needed to make?
I think there's two questions. I'll start with the second one. I didn't think it was a great film that I had to make. I think it was more of a personal questioning, because I really questioned what I'd done when I'd gone to Vietnam and volunteered there. And I kind of wanted to know what the other volunteers thought that they were doing, and if they were sharing the same kind of thoughts and questions as I had. And at the very beginning, I had no idea like how bad some volunteerism programs can actually get. It was through the interviews and through meeting experts that it kind of became clear. Even the numbers that I give, like from the industry profiting and things like this, these are numbers that I only researched in post-production. So when I was filming, I actually didn't know how big the industry was. So it all kind of came together when I came back and I was editing the film. So I had no idea that it was a good film that I had to do. And I think it became such a big, did you mean like, why has it become such a big topic that we're talking about, or why has it become such a trend?
Yeah, no, why has it become such a big topic that we're speaking about?
I think because it became, I mean, it was the fastest growing branch within the tourism industry. So it went really big, really fast, and nobody really questioned the impacts of it. And kind of all at the same time, some child protection NGOs mostly started talking about the negative impacts, mostly of volunteering in orphanages. And through that, then the topic became a little bit bigger. So if you do volunteer in an orphanage, there are many bad sides to it, and there's 60 years of protection, child protection research that prove it. But then it kind of started raising the questions of, okay, well, if you're building a wall or painting a wall in a school, does that really have an impact? And I think more and more, maybe experts in the field seeing the bad consequences of voluntourism and raising the alarm made it so that people are questioning it a little bit more, which is great, actually, because it leads us closer to doing it better, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned there sort of volunteering in orphanages, and obviously that came up in the film as well. Like, surely, you know, if a child is living in an orphanage, it could be a really good person that we want to help with our international volunteering. Like, why is that a bad thing to do?
This could last for a really long time.
2 minutes would be great.
Okay. So most of the children that are placed into orphanages, 80% of them have children. And we know through research that growing up in an orphanage is never a good environment for a child. It has many like bad consequences on their development later in life. So the fact that these children have parents that could take care of them, but are still put in a dangerous environment for them, is because, well, one of the reasons is because most of these places and institutions are funded by financial donations through volunteers or from abroad. So the more people volunteer in orphanages, the more these institutions can keep on existing, whereas children should actually be put in foster care. And if there was no money to fund these institutions, then hopefully they could kind of transition into a better form of care for these children. So there's many other things as well. Like we have a lot of numbers that prove that children growing up in orphanages have a less better development than other children that are raised within a family environment. Mm-hmm. But it also opens the door. Most of the time, volunteers from abroad that come into orphanages are not asked for a CV or a police background check. So it's also opening the door and exposing children to adults that are potentially really dangerous. There was so many, I used to live in Cambodia and worked in Cambodia for the past 3.5 years. And there were constantly stories of pedophiles coming from abroad. And there were pedophile rings that knew that they could have access to vulnerable children without any questions asked within these institutions. So even if people have good intentions, they're still fueling a system that is essentially very harmful to children.
And just one point that would be really interesting to pick up on, like, you know, is there such a thing as a good orphanage? You know, do you get good and bad orphanages where these things might not happen?
I think that's most of the time people would say it's okay. The orphanage that I'm volunteering in is actually good. But that's why I started by saying that the form of how do you say it, like of environment to take care of a child is not, an orphanage is never a good solution. It should always be a family environment, no matter if the orphanage is really clean, is really well funded, is really well run, is really well structured. It's the system, the ecosystem that the child is in that is harmful to the child. The fact that people come from abroad and we can't check them, that's just an added negative impact onto the fact that the child is in an institution like an orphanage. I don't know if that answers the question really clearly.
No, that's really helpful. Thanks. We've got a few questions coming in the chat, so I'm definitely going to go to those and then kind of bounce around them. We've had a question from Georgia. Do you believe that teaching students about white saviorism and discouraging that kind of mindset could improve the impact of voluntourism and provide a better program for local people? And I guess that fits in with some of the sort of colonialism tropes that you were speaking about in the film. So what were your thoughts on Georgia's question?
Well, actually from both sides could be interesting. So if we teach potential volunteers, let's say English students, about white saviorism, I think, yeah, it could definitely have a good impact on the way that they would engage later in volunteering or even in working in development or international aid. I think questioning your own behavior is something that is really rarely done when it comes to voluntourism. And that's why there are so many negative impacts as well. When you work in aid or when you work in international development, you're essentially doing a good thing. And it doesn't seem like there is a need to question that good thing because you're doing a good deed. So it's just good. But actually that's not the case at all. And you should, if you have in mind the kind of pitfalls of or you understand what white saviorism is, what the pitfalls are, then you can probably question yourself every step of the way and make sure that you're avoiding some of these pitfalls. But I think from the other side, because I'm not sure if you meant like, should we be educating also local people to what white saviorism is? And I think that would be great as well, because it goes kind of both ways. The children that I met when I was filming, local children in Cambodia or in Indonesia, automatically saw a white person as someone they could trust, and that was extremely dangerous as well. And if we had that conversation of white saviorism, then it might save a lot of people from a lot of dangerous situations, for sure.
That's a really good point. We've actually got another question here from Jordan in a little bit of a similar vein, but he says, does some of the profit from voluntourism go to people from poor countries? For example, do people from Cambodia own some of the voluntourism companies or potentially profit from this trade?
Yeah, definitely. So the way that it usually works, sometimes it's a little bit different, but from what I've seen is you would have, let's say a European company, so based in France or based in the UK, and they would advertise and market voluntourism trips, but then they would send volunteers into local organizations. And part of the money that the volunteer pays for that placement, for their 2-week program or whatever, goes to the local organization. So there are a lot of orphanages, for example. Again, I come back to that example, but it's a big one in Cambodia, where we know were funded just for the sake of making profit, because they knew they would have volunteers coming in, and that would just be a source of income. So they do get money from it most of the time. Like, I think Megan in the documentary was explaining it, that she said she paid $2,000 and they only gave a donation of £100 or £200 to the local organization, which is still enough. If you're a local organization in Cambodia and you receive 10 volunteers per week, that's a lot of money compared to having a regular job.
And I guess just connected to that then, I mean, if someone's paying that much money, do they stop being a volunteer and turn into a bit of a consumer? Because one of the people in the film spoke about, you know, they could get involved in any of the projects that they wanted to, regardless of their skills. And it felt a little bit like they had a consumer mentality rather than a volunteer mentality. Do you think that's prevalent?
I think they didn't have it when they chose their trip. They had it when they realized that this was the case when they were there. I don't think they could consciously realize that this is what was happening, but they were saying it when John says it, and he says, I can go on anything. He's kind of lost the motivation to put himself really through a program, and he knows he has 1 week to fulfill a mission or something. He just realized that he could really basically do anything. And I think Megan says it as well. She was like, she really realized when we were talking to each other that they were just keeping her busy, basically, and that none of the projects were really thought through or followed up after. It was more that she was a source of money and she wanted to feel good, so they gave her something to do. It's not always the case, but with the volunteers that I've talked with, it was quite obvious.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. We've got another question here saying that the current pandemic has shown, perhaps now more than ever, the shocking levels of poverty within the UK. Do you think there is a perceived view that volunteering abroad is somewhat more rewarding or more deserving investment of our time than helping people in the UK? Like, is it like, do you have that glamour associated with volunteering internationally compared to volunteering at home?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. No matter, people can say no, but volunteering abroad goes with traveling. Usually you're going to an extremely poor country because that's where the needs will be greater. So it's an adventure, especially if you're as young as the volunteers that I've interviewed in the film. It was probably the first time that they went abroad this far alone. So it was completely an adventure. And I think a side of voluntourism, and that's why it became such a trend so quickly, is that travel became so accessible to everyone. So it wasn't just enough to just go on an adventure and travel with your backpack. You had to add a little extra to it. But there's definitely a side of, I mean, probably all the volunteers that I was with had an Instagram account and were very happy to post photos of them with children. And I think that it's both ways as well, because the volunteer was happy to post these photos, but also people back home would actually praise them for, upon seeing these photos, would really think that they were doing something good and keep on telling them that they were doing something good. So there's definitely a more glamorous side to it, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a follow-up question from Ella, actually, saying, would it not also be worth considering the environmental impact when looking to volunteer internationally and the carbon footprint increasing? Obviously, if you're flying thousands of miles to do your volunteering, is there an argument that perhaps you should stay a bit closer to home to be a bit greener?
That's actually a really good point, which I'm going to use in the next talks that I do. So thank you for that question. But yeah, completely. And it goes to show how little thought is put into the choice of going abroad. You don't really question how good your impact is going to be at all. I think when you engage in volunteerism, like these kind of short trips that you pay a lot of money for, and yeah, it should definitely be something that you think of when you engage yourself abroad. Your carbon footprint.
Great. And we've had a couple of questions about sort of picking out organisations, and we'll come back to it in a moment about how you can do this ethically, as I believe that you think we can. But are there any particular, this is a question from Emma, are there any particular telltale signs when you might be looking at a company's website or the literature that they're producing that you think, oh, this might not be a really ethical organisation? What would you look for in an organisation?
I think if you see that the programs are more structured around the volunteer, so that all the marketing is done to actually get the volunteer to go on these kind of projects, rather than actually talking about the program that the volunteer is going to be a part of, that's already kind of a red flag. It means that it's probably more a business model geared toward tourism and profit rather than international development. If you also have a company that still offers, there are less and less, but still there are some that still do it, that offers volunteering in an orphanage, then you know for sure that they haven't done their homework and they haven't done their research and they're still engaging in programs that are harmful for children. If they don't ask you for a CV, or if they don't, if the marketing kind of says like, you don't need to have any special skills, but just a lot of motivation and a little smiley face, then probably that's not good. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I know our colleague Ruth Taylor, who was in the video, came up with a really good example. She was like, the 2-minute rule. If you can sign up to volunteer and pay your money within 2 minutes, then you should definitely be stepping away from that organisation. That's a really dangerous organisation to be looking at. And one of the other things which I found out, I think probably through talking to you at some point, was that a lot of the orphanages and volunteering projects are based where tourists are most likely to be, which obviously probably doesn't reflect where the greatest need is as well. Like we're seeing all these sort of spring up in the touristy areas. Is that something that you found a lot with your research?
Yeah, definitely. I think in Cambodia, most of the orphanages are around Siem Reap, which is the most touristic city in Cambodia, because that's where the Angkor temples are. And there was a number, which I'm going to try to say, but I'll probably mess it up, that over the last 10 years in Cambodia, there's been an increase in the number of orphanages by 75%. even though we know the number of actual orphans who don't have one parent to take care of them has consistently decreased. And most of these orphanages were based around Siem Reap. And it's one of the richest regions of Cambodia because there's so many tourists there. So the link between tourism and volunteering there, or financial gain, is really clear. And I think there's other examples in Nepal that are more clear, and other numbers. The research is completely like transparent on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've spent quite a lot of time in Ghana, and I've seen exactly the same in the touristy areas. Get lots of orphanage, lots of volunteering projects sort of popping up, which don't necessarily, obviously, isn't where the greatest need is. It's just where the tourists with the money are. So I've got questions coming in, and just to say, if you would like to ask a question to Chloe, please feel free to write it in the chat. We've had a question from Joanna. This is going back to some of the work that you were talking about earlier. But is there any data or studies that analyse the psychological impact these projects have on children due to the conveyor belt of volunteers and unsustainable routines? So yeah, what is the research that's been done in this? Can you point us in a direction so we can read more?
I'm not actually, I know there's a lot of research on the impact of growing up in orphanages, and there's a lot of research mostly related to volunteering in orphanages, because that's where the biggest lobby and that's where the biggest child protection experts are working on. But I'm not actually sure there's, maybe Dave, you know more than me, but I'm not actually sure there's research that's been researching actually not just in an orphanage, but in a school or something. I'm not actually sure there's a research like that.
Yeah, I think there has been some done. I was going to share a link in the chat, actually, the research page on the Rethink Orphanages hub. There's some really good things on there. So that's a great question, Joanna.
Yeah.
We got a question from Kat, and she says, what is the best way to spread awareness about this issue? Like, what can we do? And I know you've been working really hard on this for many years, but like, what can people who are here today do to get involved in this?
You can share the film, but you can talk about it. I think even calling out, because you're going to have around you potentially people that will engage in these kind of projects, that potentially will post it on social media, kind of calling them out or asking them questions about it, or making not necessarily, really attacking them, but kind of trying to ask them what they think their impact is. I think that's good. And just having a general conversation. I've been working on this issue for the past 5-6 years, and I still have people very close to me that believe that it's okay to go volunteer in an orphanage, and it makes for very awkward conversations. But you should always question it and talk about it. I think the more, in a good way, the more we question it, then the closer we are to doing it better. But sharing, there's more and more. So there's the film, but there's more and more. There's another documentary that was done in Canada as well that's really good. There's more and more articles and blog posts about this issue that you can share as well. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, no, some really good tips there. Yeah, there's so much information out there. Something I would say as well to anyone here who's a student at university, we actually have a pledge that universities can sign up to, saying that they won't promote orphanage volunteering. I'm going to share that pledge in the chat. So, if you're a student at a university, you're more than welcome to, you can check which universities have signed up to that pledge, and you can go and campaign and say to your university, let's make sure we don't advertise any orphanage volunteering. But let's make the conversation a little bit more positive. As we saw at the start, sort of 90% of the people in this group do want to volunteer internationally. Like, I've done it in the past and had some amazing experiences. I know you have as well. Like, what does a good international volunteering experience look like, and how can some of these people with us today actually go about doing that?
So I think it's really hard to describe one good volunteering experience, because it will always depend on the person, on your skill, and on the time that you've got. But probably before choosing where you're going to go, is actually taking the time to think about where you want to go. Because I think, you know, that comes back to the 2-minute rule. If you buy your trip in 2 minutes, then probably you haven't asked yourself the right questions at all beforehand. But questioning what your actual skills are, and in the time that you're given abroad, how you're going to put those skills to work. If you're going to actually be able to fulfill something, if there's a need with the local organization that you're going to work with. If you say you go through an organization within Europe to choose your volunteering placement, if you can talk to past volunteers as well and see how their experiences were, then you're a little bit closer to finding the volunteer placement that is right for you. And it will be different for anyone, I really think. You could volunteer. I don't think the amount of time that you have defines the impact that it's going to have. It's more the mindset that you're in, the skills that you have, the organization that you're going with. So taking the time and doing your research beforehand will avoid most of the negative impacts that we're talking about now, I think. It's really questioning it, like critically thinking about how you're choosing your placement and where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, the students I've worked with in the past, the ones I've sort of found it's worked the best, it is a really long lead up time, like months before you go, asking yourself lots of questions, asking organizations questions. I was going to share a link actually to some of those questions, which can be really good. Joshua, I saw you just had your hand up. Did you have a comment that you'd like to add in, or a question that you'd like to ask Chloe?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in on what was being said about the international volunteering, like picking a good opportunity. I was really fortunate to go on a good one a couple of years ago, and we were actually matched with local volunteers when we were out there to support the translation, to support their development for what was going to carry on happening once we left. It was very much a facilitated conversation before we got there as well on what the local groups wanted us to do while we were there. So it took over a month to get confirmed onto the project, sort of thing. So just wanted to highlight some of the good things to look out for as well. Like, how are you going to communicate when you're out there? Because I went on training for another project that was looking at getting people out internationally, and they were teaching us 100 words, which is 100 UK words that it's reasonable to expect other people to know or pick up quickly. And I was just like, no, that's not okay. Like, we can't just go out there, speak English and be like, we're here to save you. So I was very vocal in that session saying that that was disgusting, but yeah.
But you knew. See, that's interesting, because you knew how to make the difference as well. I think a lot of the voluntourists that I've interviewed in the film, most of them were completely clueless beforehand, and it wasn't their fault at all. They didn't have that critical thinking time at all, and then they ended up in negative programs, which were negative for them as well, because I think now they were so disgusted by what they were doing and disappointed that probably they're never going to volunteer again, and that's actually really sad.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Joshua. That was great. Yeah, I mean, that was something that did come across in the film. Like, either the volunteers hadn't quite sort of assessed their role in the sort of the cog in the system, or they just seemed quite sort of disappointed by it. Like you said, that one girl at the end, she was just like, I feel really patronized. I don't, you know, I haven't enjoyed this at all. I've paid all this money. You know, did you get the impression that lots of people do come back from these like feeling a little bit used and a little bit unfair?
Yeah, most of them gave me that impression. With Megan, it was instantly as we were doing the interview, and she was really disappointed, and it was sad actually, because she'd come with the best of intentions really, and was completely disappointed. And more than disappointed, she was completely disillusioned, and that was sad. When you're this young, it's a little bit sad. But some of them were very happy with what they were doing and didn't really question it. And that's also dangerous in its own way, because they would come home and tell their friends, you know, I built this well and probably saved Cambodia. You should go too. And that just perpetuates the non-critical thinking part of getting engaged into a volunteering project. Yeah, but that was more rare, if I can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've still got a few minutes, so if anyone would like to ask another question or come in with a comment, feel free to write that in the chat box. Or like Josh did, you can just raise your hand and I'll be really happy to sort of welcome you into the talk as well. I mean, something that did come across in the film is obviously that, you know, some people, they might not have any relevant skills, but they're still really passionate about traveling and sort of learning. I mean, you interviewed Amy from Ananya Journeys. Like, do you want to just tell us a little bit about that type of trip instead as a potential alternative to international volunteering?
Yeah, so that's actually something that I mention most of the time as an alternative because if most of the time people ask me how they can find a good volunteering project. So think about your skills, think about the time. If you realize at the end of your critical thinking phase, you realize that actually you're not going to have an impact or you're going to have a negative impact, then the humble thing to do is to decide not to go. Even if it's frustrating and you really want to give some of your time. I understand that it's frustrating, but it's better not to do it. But an alternative is just traveling in the first place is good. I mean, discovering a country and learning about its history, you're coming back a little bit more open-minded. You've met new people. That's always good. But you haven't done it in a patronizing kind of way, let's say. And Ayana Journeys, so the two women that I interviewed, Amy and Sarah, they've set up a company that organizes educational tours of Cambodia, mostly for groups of students. They don't go volunteering at all, but every day they meet a religious leader or a political leader in Cambodia, and they have debates with people from NGOs. So they do visit NGOs, but they don't actually do the work themselves. And they have different topics that they talk about throughout their trip. So they visit the country, but they also learn about the history, the political situation that Cambodia is in now. And they probably come out of it knowing so much more than if they'd gone to build a well or paint a wall of a school for 2 weeks. And I think that's probably one of the best alternatives to voluntourism in the long run as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So their theory is obviously very much you need to learn before you can serve. And if you don't have a really good understanding of the issue, then you're probably not going to be very, very helpful to anybody. A couple of other questions. So do you think the same things can happen with volunteering focused like more on wildlife conservation? And I appreciate that wasn't in your film, but do you have a thought on that as well?
Yeah, there was so I don't know as much on the conservation, but I know there were some programs that were, I know in Cambodia there was like elephant orphanages that were basically just being really bad environments for the elephants where they were beaten up and just for the sake of profit. So on the same principle as setting up an orphanage or a school just to attract profit, some of these conservation elephant orphanages were built kind of the same way. I know of some examples, so it can happen. I'm not sure if it's as visible, let's say, but yeah, it can happen. For as long as I think programs are built to make profit and for the volunteer anyway, there's always going to be negative sides that will come out of that kind of business model. Yeah,
really good point. We've got a couple of really good questions that have just come in. The first one is from Joanna. This is a really big one, so it might be difficult for you to cover in sort of 60 seconds or so. But how do you think the aid/voluntourism industry can be redesigned to break down the white savior, poverty, and post-colonial stereotypes in order for it to become more sustainable? As I said, that's a pretty big question, but if you had one or two thoughts on that, that would be fantastic.
God. That's a huge, I don't know. I wish I knew. I think first, it's hard because when you talk about voluntourism, a lot of people tend to associate it with international development and aid. And first of all, that needs to be completely separated, I think, because otherwise both of these worlds are put into the same basket Whereas in international aid and international development, that's professionals that give their lives, that's a career, give their lives to it. There are definitely problems with white saviorism within that industry, and probably much more complicated to break than within the voluntourism industry for me. I think in the voluntourism industry, the change has already started. There's a lot of organizations that have stopped or have pledged at least to stop sending volunteers into orphanages, and that change to happen over quite a short period of time at the end of the day. And the conversation is still ongoing. In France, we're doing efforts to change the law so that companies can't use the word volunteering to describe for-profit activities, so that the marketing will change and volunteers that are trying to go abroad will know the difference between going on a tourism trip and actual volunteering. So I think you can, within the voluntourism industry, it's hopefully happening. This talk about white saviorism, about the aid industry, I wish I could have an answer for that, but I don't know.
No, that's a great answer. Thank you very much. We had a question from Rebecca. Did you interview any local Cambodians in the film? And I saw, obviously, there were a couple. And if so, what was their viewpoint on the volunteers? And did they recognize the white savior complex as some of the volunteers might have had? Or did they understand the distress it caused the children when the volunteers were moving on?
It was actually quite rare. I did. So there's Cho, the Cambodian tour guide at the end, and he was quite, he knew and recognized the problem a lot. I think at the end he says, you know, is this how you view Cambodia? And he's very uncomfortable with the idea that volunteers have of his own country. And he was very vocal about it, and that was really interesting. And there are a lot of a Cambodian friend of mine once told me, you think our children are puppies, you come and you play with them and then you leave. And that's a terrible, terrible thing to say, even though it's kind of true. So they did see it, but you had other not necessarily Cambodians, because I also interviewed people in Indonesia, the director of a local organization in Indonesia, who didn't really see what the problem was, and probably because he was not profiting but living from this industry and from the volunteers, and he had a great relationships with the volunteers as well. So there was probably nothing bad had happened that he could base his opinion on, but there was a bit of both, let's say.
Sure, that's really interesting. Thank you. We just have one more question. I was about to wrap things up, but the question is: do you think voluntourism is kind of like colonialism? You know, what you spoke about that in the film a little bit. Like, what do you mean by the link between those two things?
Ooh, so hard last question. I think it's linked to the white saviorism topic. That all the volunteers that I've talked with, I think there's one girl, Nikki. She says, you know, she talks about the local people, and she says everybody knows us, and if they see a white person, they think I have money. And it's such a small way of looking at the environment that she's in, that it really shocked me that this was the only way that she was reading the situation that she was in. And that was it. And that was just her truth. And she didn't question the fact that maybe she was very young. She was coming into a country and a culture that she had no idea of before. She didn't understand the language, but she didn't question it. If she had gone to a European country, she would have thought completely differently, for sure. And first of all, she wouldn't have gone to school. Nobody would have let her. She wouldn't have had the thought of going into a primary school to teach, for example, French children. So it's this very uncomfortable thought that because you're white, because you're from a rich country, then you don't have to question your impact, because no matter what, it's going to be a good one. And I think that's the link.
No, I think that's a really good. I mean, something else that I picked up on. I can't remember the guy's name, but he said, you know, I'm here because I've got a Western education and because I've had a good upbringing. I should be sharing this with people, which was a very similar sort of justification for colonialism. You know, 200 years ago, we need to go and educate the savages, you know, to put it in the inverted commas of what have been described as then, like he should be there doing that, and these people can't maybe help themselves. I need to be here to help these people. And that was definitely very similar to some of the sort of colonialism language that was around or less than 200 years ago, less than 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, I think that probably brings us to the end, but I was just going to share kind of a couple of links in the chat box as well. And the first one, I mean, we spoke about learning service and the sort of theory behind that. If you would like to read more on that, there's a brilliant book out there, which I think Chloe features in as well, the Learning Service book, and I really recommend looking into that. And another thing which students can do is sign up to the Sidekick pledge as well. And this is all about sort of recognizing that you're not the main hero of this story, and you can help and you can make a difference. But being the sidekick is a really important thing to do. And finally, if you want to sort of read a bit more about these experiences of what it's like for young people to potentially grow up in an orphanage, I've also going to share a blog about that as well. But finally, I just want to say like a huge thank you to you, Chloe, for coming and sharing your wisdom and knowledge, and obviously your fantastic film, but spending the time with us today. It's been absolutely brilliant to have you here. So thank you very much. And if we could have a sort of virtual applause for Chloe, I'd really appreciate that. A sort of Zoom applause. Fantastic. Yeah, lots of clapping hands coming in.
Weird.
I know it's odd world that we're living in now. If we were in person, there'd be rapturous applause and a standing ovation, I'm sure. I'd also like to say a big thank you to my colleagues Amy and Mariana for helping me put this on. Like, you've both been brilliant and so helpful. So well done for that, and all the brilliant work that you've been doing for Student Volunteering Week as well. And finally, thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight and contributed in such a thoughtful way. We've had some really brilliant questions, so I really appreciate that. And apart from that, enjoy the rest of Student Volunteering Week. Get involved in your university. If you haven't volunteered before, now is the perfect time to start. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cool. Bye, everyone.
I'm just going to let people leave at their pace. But thank you, everyone.
Should we cut the YouTube?
Oh my God, yes.